to this online forum. Good afternoon, I'm Sandy Eagar, the current chair of the Refugee Nurses of Australia. And today we're presenting a part one of our virtual RNA National Forum 2020. As you're probably all aware, we did intend to have the forum in Melbourne in March, but we were thwarted in our endeavours by the rotten COVID. But not to be deterred, we think the information that and the knowledge that should be shared by the participants of the forum is too important to leave, and in particular knowing that where we have issues with refugees with disability, we thought the first presentation of the forum should be the one that we're giving this afternoon. I'd just like to take this opportunity to recognise the traditional owners of the land in which we meet here at Liverpool in New South Wales. So of the Darawal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and to those emerging. So I'd like to thank everybody for their time this afternoon. We understand how busy people are during this difficult time with COVID. And I was just saying, if we actually manage to get anybody from Victoria online, I'll count that as a win. So there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. You will be muted as attendees while the presentation is going on, but we will have a process of you being able to submit questions. So to introduce our speakers for today, it's my great pleasure to introduce actually two of my staff here from Sydney, from the New South Wales Refugee Health Service, Mark Mahoney, who's a clinical nurse specialist, and Christine Datuin, who's a registered nurse. And both Mark and Kris are part of our disability support team here at the New South Wales Refugee Health Service. So over to you, Mark and Kris.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you to the RNA for organising this webinar series. So we're glad that we can be part of it today. We were looking forward to presenting in Melbourne back in March, but we're thankful that we can have this forum this afternoon. As you know, being a refugee puts you in a vulnerable position, and so many challenges and barriers come about. And so this is multiplied when you have a disability. And so that refugees with a disability are vulnerable on two fronts simultaneously. So as such, we want to talk about this double jeopardy, in particular as it relates to our clients who settle in Australia and have to navigate disability services as part of their settlement journey. So as Sandy has said, my name is Mark, and I've been part of the New South Wales Refugee Health Service disability support team since 2018, and my colleague Kris joined last year. So we've learnt a lot in that time, and I've learned a lot from Kris in the last 12 months, and we're continually in this process of learning. So we're certainly not the source of all knowledge, but we do hope to share some of what we've learned and hope that it will help us all to better support our clients who have disabilities. We also appreciate that our experiences in Sydney may differ in some ways to other parts of the country, so certain issues that you might be facing might not be something we're as familiar with, but as best as we can, we will hope to support you. So I'll start with a bit of background before Kris gets into some of the nitty-gritty of the NDIS game. So as you know, Australia generally settles around 19,000 refugees a year. And of course, this has come to a halt in recent times due to COVID-19. And given that this year's theme for Refugee Week was welcome, this is a sad irony. But it's worth noting that before COVID, actually before 2012, refugees with a disability, whether physical or intellectual were not welcome into Australia. They were excluded from Australia's refugee and humanitarian program. And the reason for this, in short, is because they were seen as a burden on public and community resources and were only viewed in light of the perceived economic cost of their condition. But 2012 brought about a welcome policy change that enabled those who have a disability to have the health criteria applied to them waived, and therefore were able to be granted entry to Australia on humanitarian grounds. So whilst this policy change in 2012 was a very welcome change and a much needed change, it did coincide with two other significant changes. Firstly, the National Disability Insurance Scheme began to roll out in 2013. And here in Southwest Sydney, it took effect from July 2016. So this represented a massive shift from the previous model, which was based on block funding and services, assuming a one-size-fits-all approach. It was a model where funding went directly to the provider of goods and services. The NDIS, however, as Australia's first national scheme for people with a disability, provides funding directly to the individuals based on their individual needs. Also in 2016 and 17, an additional 12,000 refugees fleeing conflict in Iraq and Syria were given permanent residency in Australia. So these three changes put together brought about a significant challenge. And so to meet the needs of these vulnerable people takes a lot of work, and that's what we want to share with you a little bit today. And as I said, shortly, Kris will go into the nitty-gritty, but first let me give a bit more background into the challenges faced by all refugees, and then in particular, refugees with a disability. So firstly, if we do consider refugees in general, the initial months of settlement, as you know, can be some of the most challenging periods in a refugee settlement journey. They typically arrive in Australia with limited or no financial resources, limited or no English, or knowledge of Australian culture, or laws and systems. On arrival, they are confronted with a myriad of often competing settlement challenges, from finding appropriate accommodation to learning English, completing education, obtaining and upgrading qualifications, seeking employment, supporting family members still living in refugee situations overseas, learning about life in Australia, and recovering from experiences of trauma and torture. Settlement and health services may also have little or no information on the client's needs prior to arrival. And so, for example, a family may arrive in Australia without a much needed wheelchair, and service providers may be unaware of this, which creates a problem as soon as the family arrives at the airport. Now, thankfully, since 2017, health alerts have been provided to service providers, notifying them of the needs of people with disabilities upon their arrival in Australia, but things can still be missed or not properly identified. A few more challenges to think about. Humanitarian entrants with a disability find it hard to navigate, access, and utilize mainstream and disability support services. Without essential formal and informal support to access services, this cohort of people is likely to fall through system gaps. They need focused and specialized support to navigate the NDIS, including proving NDIS eligibility, applying for the NDIS, pre-planning support, and proper implementation of their NDIS plans. Given that the NDIS is designed to be a consumer-driven service, it makes this need even greater. Clients and their families may never have had access to services and supports before. They may have no knowledge of disability services or therapies, and the disability of the family member may have never been addressed or explained to the family before. As such, this focused and specialised support that is needed can involve 50 hours or more to complete the NDIS referral and to get the family in a position to understand what goals are possible and what needs they have, which can be met through the NDIS. Now, an Australian living with a disability is typically linked to health and disability support services as they are required from birth, or when disability is first suspected. Diagnosis is often available before services are often needed. In contrast, humanitarian entrants have no service history in Australia and arrive needing services, but may be without a recognised diagnosis. And without clear evidence of their disability and the functional limitations that result from it, they are unable to access NDIS services or basic equipment like mobility aids. They can face significant delays in accessing basic services such as equipment. It can therefore easily take 12 months or more for a newly arrived refugee to obtain the necessary supporting evidence to gain access into the NDIS and begin to access much needed services. All these potential delays and the potential to fall through system gaps can have a negative effect on physical and emotional health and well-being, making the settlement process more challenging, significantly impacting the possibility for social participation and full inclusion in Australian society. And these impacts affect not only our clients with disabilities, but their families as well. So in light of all these challenges, the New South Wales Refugee Health Service Disability Support Team was formed in 2016. And we seek to assist our clients and their carers with all aspects of the understanding the disability services available and the NDIS application and implementation process. And that's what we'll be discussing with you more shortly. We also run a monthly support group called For a Good Life, and it's based in Fairfield, and it allows our clients and their families to connect, to share stories and challenges and increase their knowledge of NDIS services available. We also provide for a GP clinic with one of our GPs here, which is a 2-hour holistic and quite intensive clinic where we go through the whole history of the client and their family and link them up to appropriate services. And so our team includes 3 registered nurses. We have social work input as well as the GP and bilingual community educators. Here are some data just put together by our service, just to give you a little bit of a picture of what's been happening. So from 2017 until the end of 2019, we received 325 referrals for disability support for refugees in Southwest Sydney and Western Sydney local health districts. So that's 325 people who previously may well have been excluded from resettlement because of the economic cost to the Australian community due to their disability. So most of these clients were new arrivals, having been in Australia for less than 2 months, and all had been in Australia for less than 5 years. So thank you for listening to that introduction. I'll hand it over to Kris now, who will get into part of the nitty-gritty of the NDIS. And after each section, we will answer any questions that you might have, so you can put them onto the Q&A section, and then we will try and attend to them. We might, depending on how many questions we get, we may not be able to answer all the questions today, but we will be able to follow up after this session as needed. So thank you, and I'll hand it over to Kris.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Datuin. I'm a registered nurse with a disability team since end of 2019. And firstly, I'd like to thank Mark and Sandy for the knowledge and imparting me with all the things that they know about NDIS and disability, clients with disability, and for continuing to strive providing patient-centered care for our clients. So thank you, Mark and Sandy. So I'll be talking about the NDIS application implementation process that we use here for New South Wales Refugee Health Services, and I hope that you can look at these processes and see what will work for your current service in the state that you're in. So I'll just start here. So getting into the NDIS. Our focus today is on the entry part of NDIS. We have 5 different steps that we take that we will go through with you today. In each step, if you have any clarifications or questions at the end of the steps, if you can just put it on the Q&A and we'll try to answer best we can. So at first we gather and submit the evidence for the NDIS, and then we conduct an NDIS pre-planning either through Refugee Health Services conducting this service or different service providers. After that, we have the NDIS planning meeting that is conducted by the local area coordinator, and once that's done, we have the plan approved, and then we have the implementation and review options if the funding is not adequate. Throughout this different steps, we're building our clients' understanding of the NDIS process and services, and try to build rapport and give them education of the Australian healthcare system. And also later on, we'll discuss the different NDIS option for children under 7. So first step is we gather and submit evidence. So we receive referrals from different agencies. Most of them is through our HSP providers for newly arrived refugees, but we also receive referrals from GPs or circumstances changes within the 5 years that refugees has arrived from different disability support services. And to be eligible for NDIS, you need to be under 64 years old. Now, we also have a GP clinic here in RHS that provides a holistic overview of our clients' needs. So this GP clinic that we have can run up to 2 hours because the community GP doesn't have the time for this assessment. And this actually allows us to get a bigger picture of the client's needs and the family dynamics. We organize necessary assessments for the clients. And when it comes to gathering this evidence, we need to keep in mind that we need to prove to the NDIS that the client has a disability that is permanent and significantly impacts their functional capacity, and that there are no further possible treatment options available, and there's unlikely for any improvement in the client's condition. So that's when we get the allied health reports and medical specialist reports and other offshore reports. Now, to get some of these assessments, particularly, for example, an OT through the public system, can be a very lengthy wait. And so the way around this is through making what is called a purchase service request under the Department of Home Affairs. So I'll explain what the purchase service request is in a little while, on the next slide. Just waiting for the PowerPoint. Nope. Let's just share the screen again. happening here? I need to. Is that working? Can everyone see that? So, okay. There you go. Now, firstly, before we get to send a purchase service request, we need to ensure that the client has Tier 3 or specialized and intensive services support through the humanitarian settlement program. If the client has the humanitarian settlement program, but is not under a Tier 3 or what we call specialized intensive service, we need to first ask with support through the HSP. What we process here in Refugee Health is we send the current case manager a request for a Tier 3 or SIS support from the humanitarian service provider. If the client has been exited from the HSP, referrals can be made directly through Department of Home Affairs, and there's a link here that actually has the form to directly send to the Department of Home Affairs to get that special intensive support service for the client. A lot of the times, this only occurs when a client has been in Australia for say 2 or 3 years. They've been exited in the HSP program, but there's been a change of circumstance in their physical or intellectual disability within that 5 years of having the refugee status. Okay, so once they do have the SIS, the client is then case managed by a social worker and assisted in their settlement process. And now, once we have NDIS, then once we have the Tier 3 or SIS, then this is a pathway to get private assessments through the purchase service request. Now, it's a mouthful. Okay. So making a purchase service request is the humanitarian support program provider can request and obtain funding for assessment for clients through the Department of Home Affairs portal. There's the says here the service code for purchase service request is F24. So it's not necessarily valuable for us, but it is valuable for your HSP provider of what this code means, and F stands for foundation, for when they're actually requesting the service purchase request on the DHA portal. Okay. Now, once we have approval from the Department of Home Affairs, so the purchase service requests can only be accessed by Tier 3 clients through the HSP provider. And we also need to prove that there are no timely free services available through government programs or channels. For example, here at Liverpool, there's a 6-month waiting period for an OT assessment, and we can rightly argue that this is not timely, and therefore we need the purchase service privately so we can obtain the evidence required for NDIS in a timely manner. Okay. And next slide, we have an example of the letter that we sent to for a request for an Tier 3 or SIS support for a client, but also this letter is sent by the SIS to the Department of Home Affairs for the purchase service request as well. I've highlighted that can you please refer this client to SIS on the grounds that she has a disability that it's long-term, is in a financial hardship and at risk of isolation, and therefore an OT assessment will be needed for timely NDIS applications. Okay. Now, there's a new access request form that was just released in May. And we've got the link here that you can have a look for NDIS. And we've also got a case study example of what we've put through as a request for SIS and the evidence that we've submitted to NDIS. Do we have any questions at the moment? So one of the questions that's come through, how did you get funding for your service? Is it state funded? Supported by existing funding for Refugee Health Service, or separate? You want to answer that?
So I think your question is how did we get funding for the disability support team to be in operation? I think Sandy might be better placed to answer the details of that, but a case was put that there was this need that needed to be met, and the ministry agreed to fund for these positions within the Refugee Health Service. So to have a specialised team dedicated to disability support. So perhaps Sandy, did you want to add to that process a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's certainly correct. So we put in a fairly comprehensive business case to the New South Wales Ministry of Health. Whinged, moaned, complained, nagged, and I think it got to the point where they just gave us some money to tell us to go away and be quiet. But look, important that when you put a business case in, that you really think about everything that you need. So one of the things that we've done in our business case for the first time was actually put in a budget for equipment. Now we know that people get on arrival equipment only for a certain couple of weeks, fairly limited at times. So we made sure we put the budget in so that we could fund a much broader range of equipment. And we also put in the business case that we needed some funding to put it somewhere to store the equipment, because I'm not sure if your services are like ours, but you know, our office space and stuff like that was actually never built for putting equipment, and you know, it was no HNS risk of staff stumbling over, you know, odd wheelchairs and shower chairs and stuff like that. So we'd certainly be able to do a session at a later date about putting a business case together, and as I say, that funding included staffing, included admin support, including equipment and storage. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Sandy. We've had another question. Have you had experience of the funding not being provided for the OT assessments? This has happened in our area recently, despite the person being Tier 3 and having significant disability. So yeah, Kris has shared the information that normally we provide for getting Tier 3, and then the information we provide in order to seek a purchase service request, outlining why we're requesting it. And in our experience, we've found that we almost always get approval. And so I think it was partly a process of providing the right information to the DHA and making it clear how much it would cost, and making it clear that there is no other timely free option available. And we found that by really outlining that clearly, we have pretty much a 100% success rate now. So it's to the point where we generally assume that it's just a matter of time. So if you want us, we could yeah, help you in that process if you're having any barriers with that, as much as we can.
Yeah. A lot of the times, I'll just add into that, a lot of the times the DHA does come back to us and asking for more information of why a privately funded OT is required. So we give them the information of the waiting list in the hospital is, can be 6 to 12 months because the patient is not in an acute stage, but also, again, that the patient is in a financial hardship, therefore they won't be able to afford, $300-400 of an OT assessment, and that's why they need to provide the funding for the OT assessment. So we've had quite a bit of success when we have asked for purchase service requests through the HSP provider. Yeah, any other questions? Move on to the second step. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to put this one down. Now, once we have, so that's the one. Once we have access through the NDIS, we have a pre-planning meeting with the family. So often the families are not clear of what they can actually achieve through the NDIS. And I would say it's not only just our refugee families, but Australians as well, especially when NDIS started rolling out. So it's very important for this step to help clarify and prepare the family for the actual planning meeting with the local area coordinator. So we need to help the client consider their potential to work out of what their goals are and what needs are that they require to achieve these goals. So we've done this, our social work has done this, we've done it as well with Mark and I, but we can also have different organizations such as SSI or SIDWES or the Illawarra Advocacy to be an option down for Illawarra. Once we've identified the goals and the needs of the clients, a report is put together and provided to the LAC for the actual planning meeting. This is really effective way to advocate for our clients and makes the planning meetings much more effective and efficient. A planning meeting can be conducted with an interpreter for up to 2 hours. We've actually found that that time cuts in half, so for the family to an hour, because the planner will have this report in front of them and it's a guide for what the family will actually require of the NDIS. So we have a copy that we'll be sending out later on of what we actually asked for the plan for the plan for the NDIS. So one of the main things that we really asked for the NDIS is to provide a support coordination for our clients. So support coordinators help clients to understand, to implement and use their plans. This is not automatically provided to every NDIS participant. So given our clients are receiving NDIS for the first time, we strongly believe it is an essential part of the funding and should be included in the plan. The way with this is, so this is a little bit of a spiel that we write. We mentioned that the family has limited English language skills. That's actually not enough in terms of getting support coordinator, because they do have access to TIS, and NDIS can argue that the family can just access TIS to manage their fundings themselves. But we need to really, let them know that the family are newly arrived at refugees. They have no understanding of navigating the Australian healthcare system, let alone NDIS. And they only have the short-term support from Refugee Health and their SSI. And we also ask for support and training for the client and the family around digital literacy, particularly now with COVID, that everything's online and everything is through MyGov or their NDIS portal. And we do have an example of a pre-planning document here. And I'll just open that up for you. And these are the things that we asked for NDIS. So particularly with support coordination and transport provisions is right down at the end. So support coordination to manage and link and plan NDIS plan usage, given that the family are newly arrived refugees and thus no understanding of disability services in Australia, nor how to find or access them. And providing this to the planner, we find that we're getting quite a good amount of success in getting support coordinations for our clients. Does anyone have any questions for part 2? Could you provide a copy of one of your purchase service requests that you undertook and got approved as a guide for us? Yes, we'll be sending out this PowerPoint presentation, and you can use the service purchase request letter that we've attached in this PowerPoint. I'm just going to check with the chat. No other questions with part 2? Okay. Sorry. All right. Now we move on to part 3, and that's the actual NDIS planning meeting. So this actually takes place with the local area coordinator, or the NDIA planner. If it's under 7 years old, then the early childhood, early intervention coordinator are the ones that's actually conducting the planning stages as well. And during that planning meeting, they discuss the goals and activities and tasks the participant wants to achieve. And this pretty much covers what we talk about with clients in the pre-planning meeting. So that's why the planning meetings can be cut in half with an interpreter, because the planner will have a guide of what the client's needs are to achieve their goals. Does anyone have questions for part 3? Okay. Let me just check. So I'm going to hand over to Mark again for part 4 and part 5. Thank you.
Thanks, Kris. So moving on to part 4. So we've had the NDIS planning meeting. And so then it's just a matter of the planner approving a plan based on that information that is provided. And so usually that can take a few weeks or so, give or take, before the plan is approved. And so when the plan is approved, the plan is provided, and it normally has funding in it for a 12-month period. And the idea is that after 12 months, well, close to the end of that 12-month period, the plan gets reviewed again, and because there may be changes in circumstances, there might be need for more funding or less funding, or funding that wasn't in the first plan might be considered necessary in the second plan. So usually the first plan is for 12 months. And the funding in the plan is provided in 3 different categories. So they call them core supports, capital supports, and capacity building. And so core supports are to help you in activities that help you with your everyday life. So this is for support with achieving your activities of daily living, you know, from getting dressed, having a shower, preparing meals, everyday activities. Also provision of consumables, like continence products, for example. Also to help you with participation in community and social activities. And transport assistance, just to go to shops or appointments, those sort of things. Capital support relates to funding for equipment like assistive technologies, also for home and vehicle modifications. Whereas capacity building, as the name suggests, is all about building capacity. It's about helping the person to gain maximal amount of independence and to learn new skills that are required for that. So that could be from getting some training and also, for example, finding and keeping a job. And so sometimes the one activity could get funding in those three categories. So here's just a simple example to illustrate that. So you can imagine if somebody who needs help with showering, they might get core support, which is about helping them with the activity of daily living. So that would mean funding for a support worker to actually assist in having a shower. In terms of capital support, this might require getting a handrail to make the shower more accessible. So that's a capital support, that's a particular home modification. And then in capacity building, to help the person gain more confidence and independence in that task, a program could be put into place to teach the person skills and ways to improve their showering or hygiene. So just a basic, simple example, but hopefully that illustrates how that works. I might just quickly, hopefully if this works, show you a plan that's been de-identified to show you what it looks like. You may have seen one of these already, but this is the letter we get saying your plan has been approved, and tells you who your coordinator is, who you can contact, gives you your information about the person and their situation, a bit about the demographics, who's involved in their care, and their goals and are listed here, and how they will be assisted to achieve these goals. So for example, here you've got speech therapy for speech and development and communication. And so here the local area coordinator or support coordinator will assist in connecting to a speech therapist. Got another goal of improved support when accessing the community. Then you've got medium and long-term goals. This is all about having an occupational therapist, in this case, to assess assistive technology needs.
Mark, can I just hop in there?
Yeah.
We can't actually see that
Oh,
de-identified plan. It hasn't opened up. It may have opened up for you, but the audience can't see that. So I think because of that, we could send that and make sure that we've got that on the RNA website after the presentation.
Yeah, look, apologies for that.
Yeah, no problem. Keep going.
Anyway, so we will provide that as an example, and it's all been de-identified. I'll just check if any questions have come up. I think before I move on to the last section. So no further questions as yet. So let me move on to the last section. So which is plan implementation. So you've done all this work to get to this point, and the clients have a plan, and you don't want to get to this point and then find 6 months later that nothing's been done with the plan, and the clients don't know what to do with it. They've just got this plan sitting there in their room. It's in English. They haven't been able to work out what's going on. So things could fall apart at this step as much as any step. So it's important that we keep an eye on things at this point as well. So as Kris has talked about, we're keen to advocate for support coordination for all our clients as an essential requirement. And we found that it seems to have changed over the last few years. Like maybe two or three years ago, it was a bit hit and miss about getting support coordination, but we found in recent times, perhaps in the last 12 months, we've been able to get support coordination for the majority of our clients, but certainly not always, but it seems to have been more successful in recent times. Perhaps that's because we've got a bit more experience in how to advocate for that, and perhaps the people with the LACs that we work with are more aware of the particular needs of our clients. So we're not quite sure exactly why, but we hope it continues in that way. But having said that, if a client does have a support coordinator, potentially your work is done at that point, but not necessarily. Sometimes a support coordinator might not fulfill their role as needed, and so like there are very good support coordinators out there, and some are perhaps not as inclined to be as supportive as you would think they would be, given that's their role.
Sorry, I don't think I can see the slide.
Oh.
I don't think I can see the slide.
Okay, hope that's it. So the generally at this, I guess the challenge we have is when do we close our files, when do we discharge our clients, and that's an ongoing discussion in some ways. Potentially, if they've got a support coordinator and the support coordinator is doing a good job, we might just wait for say 6 months or so and have a follow-up phone call, and then if all's going well, we might be at a point there where we will discharge our client, but we'll also advise them that if anything does come up, they can call us and we will obviously continue to support them. Now, if they don't have a support coordinator, then that means that we have a greater role to play in trying to help them implement the plan. So sometimes we will support them to negotiate how to use the plan and link them with service providers. There are also what are called information linkages and capacity building packages that have been put together. So this is independent of the NDIS, but these are grants that are provided to organisations to deliver projects in the community that benefit Australians with disability. And so they provide advocacy and support and help with NDIS planning and implementation. So potentially that could be an option. In our context, SSI have the funding for this particular role, and so we're just developing a relationship with them now to see how that will go. So potentially there are ILCs in different areas where you are that can also help you if support coordination is not in place and extra help is needed for the family to implement their plans. Now, the other issue to think about is the plan a good plan? Maybe the plan doesn't reflect the needs of the client, and so rather than wait for 12 months to when the regular review takes place, you could look at having a review done earlier. So it's called an unscheduled review. And so that is an opportunity to express that this is what's lacking and this is why it's lacking. And then that can be reassessed, and with the aim of a new plan being put into place that reflects that need that had not been addressed. So that's the process there. Let me just check if any questions have come up. There are no further questions at the moment. So we'll try, we've got a little case study that we will try and share with you. Hopefully the screen sharing will work. If you just give us a minute, we'll try and set that up.
Yeah, sure. I'll just try to see if it works. I'm not sure if it's going to work. Let's see. We will provide the case study at the end of the presentation. Let me just see how this. Okay. We do have one question that's come through. How much funding is usually provided for support coordination? That depends. There are different levels of support coordination. So usually it goes by how many hours the client requires support coordinators. The highest, the usual level that we get for our clients is level 2, which is around $4,000, and that's around an hour a week. Depending on the client's disability, we've had level 4, and that can go up to $10,000 because the clients will require at least 2-3 hours of support coordination in trying to collaborate all the different allied health that they require. let me just see if I can share the, where can I do that? Files, no. Let's see if I can share it. How do I do that? Is there a way to share screen? Files. Where is it? Let's see.
While Kris is looking at that, I'll just to give you a bit of a sense of the timing of this, and this comes up in this case study as well. All going well, potentially from the point of getting a referral until the point of getting the person with a plan and getting that plan beginning to be implemented, all going well can be done in about a 4-month period, give or take. And that varies depending on a few different factors, but if it's relatively straightforward and things fall into place, then 4 months can be the timeline that we're looking at.
So there's a few questions on the chat. If you can actually put that in the Q&A, it'll be easier for us to navigate. But there's a question here: have you managed to get interpreter use as a line of item? NDIS plans doesn't include interpreters in their plan, just because they do have access through TIS using their NDIS reference number, but it's not going to come out of their funding. But you still need that NDIS reference number, and NDIS will be charged directly, not the clients funding themselves, if that makes sense. I'm not sure, can you see my PDF file? Yep, okay. So, because we've done so many service purchase requests, this is a brief service purchase request that I sent through our HSP provider, and a lot of it is just giving them a quote of how much the OT assessment will be, and so an OT assessment is $845, and then the physiotherapy assessment will cost $198. And I've actually attached a lot of the quotes and the client's physical medical assessment reports as evidence of why they need the OT and the physiotherapy. So this is our brief letter. There is the extensive letter that's attached to the PowerPoint that we started using at first, but then because we've done so many, we've just made it a little bit shorter for our HSP providers. This is the access request form before May of this year. So some of the new access request forms are a little bit different. The only thing I can stress with the access request form when you're filling it out for your client is the CRN. So the CRN of the client is how the NDIS can identify who the patient is. If the healthcare card address is different from the address that you've originally written on the access request form, then the NDIS will ask for more information of the patient's identity. And sometimes that can be difficult because their passport is not in English, and then we'll have to get them translated. So it's better if you can actually make sure that the address on their healthcare card or the CRN is linked, is the exact ones that you're putting on the access request form. So that's the access request form. And
so a large section of that form is there that you could fill out if you wanted to, or the alternative is to provide extra evidence, extra reports. So we find that rather than fill out all these details on the form here, we just provide the supporting evidence to go with this form.
So yeah, the only thing I write, I think I actually just wrote physical disability, and this client of mine had a CVA. I didn't fill the rest of it out, but I do have extensive evidence that's also attached to this. So our GP actually saw this client with a 2-hour assessment, and I've added that to the report for as evidence. We've also got their, so that's from my GP. We've also added the occupational therapist report that we've received here. And we've got the physiotherapy assessment. This is the offshore reports, so the immigration reports. And I think that's about it that I've sent in for this patient. So that's the one. And the next one, so this access got accepted, then we went to move forward to the pre-planning meeting that I've already shown an example earlier. So a lot of it is, again, we've got the short-term goals, the medium goals, and the long-term goals, and the needs, and then this should reflect on the client's NDIS plan, which I'm not sure if you can see the NDIS plan, but this is all one patient, so you can see the step-by-step guide of what we've had for this client. So he's actually had a total funded of $92,000 for the year, but again, that's his core support, which is, you know, what he needs to for his daily activities. And we've also got the capacity building support for him and the support coordination. So what we're talking about, level 2 support coordination, is what we usually get for our clients, and that's around, yeah, this $4,900. One thing that I'm not sure if you've seen it is the capital support. So this client has been approved for these equipment and will just need a quote. So they actually don't put a number on how much it is. They just need a quote from the occupational therapist and then submit that to NDIS. And that's about it. Do we have any questions or clarifications? So we've got questions. An ongoing issue for our service is getting cognitive assessments and diagnosis for people with intellectual disability without another medical diagnosis, example seizure disorder. This is largely because they are expensive, but also because there are no accurate cross-cultural assessment tools. How does your service get these assessments done?
Yeah, so that's a really big challenge to get those psychometric or cognitive assessments for clients. In our case, we have the luxury of having an agreement with, or a connection with, Transcultural Mental Health Centre to get our assessments done through them. So they will provide the assessment and we provide the interpreters. Other than that, an option that we haven't explored, because we have this option, could also be to consider a purchase service request. So in our context, we've been using purchase service requests for physio, OT, and speech therapy. But I think there would be a case for seeking a purchase service request for cognitive assessments as well. So that would be something to consider, I would suggest, as well. And again, if you want us to assist you with that after this seminar, we'll be happy to follow that up with you.
Yeah. So yeah, like just adding on to Mark, before I joined in, it was only a physio and occupational therapy assessment through purchase service requests that we've asked for. At the moment, we've also been getting approval for speech pathologist assessments, particularly for kids with autism or any swallowing difficulties, for kids with enteral tubes that requires feeding apparatus, all that things. But now we're also potentially try to explore specialist, so medical specialist assessments such as an ENT, because there's just the ENT waiting period in the hospital is at least 12 months. So it's mostly for, I guess, our clients that are hearing impaired or someone who's got an intellectual disability to determine what their hearing capacity is and if they need a hearing aid. And that requires an ENT input for NDIS. So, yeah. Yeah, so I think that's about it with our presentation. Is any other questions, clarification?
Okay, so I don't think we have any other questions on the board. So look, I'd just like to thank Kris and Mark very much for putting that presentation together. As you'll see, it is quite complex. It is quite complex and no doubt is looking a little daunting if you're sitting out on services in refugee health services that don't have the same access to capacity as we have. We're very lucky here in Sydney, but we really, we did really push for it, because when you think about it, people with refugees with disability are some of the most vulnerable people that we have in our society. So, as I say, we'd be very happy to share the outline and the bones of a business case that you could take up to your local state authorities as well. And RNA would also be happy to advocate to the Commonwealth where you feel that your local HSP provider is not currently able to provide the level of service in regards to Tier 3 SIS and and service provision requests up to the Commonwealth. So if you think that's an issue in your area, then certainly we will be able to pursue that on your behalf. We started discussions yesterday with the Commonwealth about that, about whether or not there could be an alternative pathway for service requests coming directly from refugee health nurses or refugee health services in lieu of their HSP provider. So watch this space. We will bring you some news about that as soon as it comes to hand. And please get in touch either with me or with your executive representative in your state for the Refugee Nurses of Australia. This work will continue here, and hopefully what we'd see, of course, is something like a disability support team in every state and territory around Australia, because we think this very concerted approach, bringing together and building expertise within your team is really important. So you may be astounded that the terminology is just tripping off their tongues, but that's okay as well. So once again, I would like to thank everybody, and we'll wish you good afternoon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.